Hey everyone, Farid here, and welcome to the overview video for my new track Santa Snow, which was released on Future Sound of Egypt Fables. For those who don't know, Fables is a label managed by Danstone and Fairy Tale, and it is a sub-label under Future Sound of Egypt, which is the main label that belongs to Ali and Fila. This track was my last and most recent release of 2017. And thankfully got some great support from Armin van Buren, Ali and Fila, Fairy Tale, Danstone, and a whole lot more. I wanted to show you guys a little bit of what went on behind the scenes of this track, how it came together, how I made the sounds, what I did, how I mixed it, all that stuff. But before all that, I'll just play a little bit of the track just so you have some context. I'll start off with a little bit of the intro, and then going into the bridge before the breakdown, and then going into the breakdown, and then the leads, going to the build-up, and then ending with the drop. I'm going to play this off of the main MP3 file right here, because this project gives my CPU a really hard time, so it's going to be very difficult to play the actual project since I'm recording my screen as well. And if you want to check out the whole track, you can check it out on my channel. There's a clip of it there if you want a better idea of what it sounds like. But for now, hope you enjoy it, and here's a little bit of the track. So I think we can probably start off with the drums and see what is going on over there. Let's start off with the drums right here. We first have the kick. Now for the kick, there's nothing really special going on in terms of the sampler itself. There's just a little bit of shortening. I shortened the kick, and that's because I felt the tail was a little bit too long. So I cut it out so that the tail of it, which has a lot of the low end, doesn't bleed into the sub bass, which is pretty sharp and attacky. So I wanted it to cut through the mix pretty well. So that's why I shortened the kick over here. Now in terms of mixing, we just have a EQ. I don't know why I have this here anymore, but sorry, we have a compressor first, and that's just to tighten up the low end and the kick a little bit more. And here are some of the settings I've used. If you're wondering why I'm using this setting, it's actually based off of a calculation. And this is based on the BPM of the track, how long I want the compression to last. I believe this is 1 measure long. I can't remember exactly, but it was based off of a calculation that I made. And that's just based on a calculator that I found online. You just put in the BPM of your track and how long you want each compression cycle to last. And then once you put that in, it gives you the release time, which is basically how long it takes until each compression cycle ends. And the way I wanted it is that with every kick hit, it starts off a new compression cycle. And that way, the compression resets every time the kick hits. And it's nice and clean that way. Now, in terms of the kick, there's nothing fancy going on. This is 12 dB, mind you, so if we put it on 30, it doesn't look like that much. But we have a little bit of a cut or a dip in the lows over here. Felt a little bit, felt the low end was a little bit too much. And so I cut out a little bit of it around the area where I found the low end to be strongest. And then there's a little bit of a low mid, I'd say, dip in the low mids. It's quite drastic, but without it, the kick sounds a little too boxy. I can show you a quick before and after. So here's what the kick sounds like with it. I'll just have to take off the filter off the kick for a second. So we can take a look at it here. So the kick with the cut sounds like this. Now without the cut, this is what the kick would sound like. So as you can probably hear, there's quite a bit more boxiness to it, and that tends to sometimes overtake the mix, and it also makes the kick a little too strong, so I have to take it down. And then going forward, we have a slight mid cut here. It's very minor. Again, it's just the frequency I felt needed to be taken a little bit down in the kick. And then here's where usually the kick has its sort of sharpness or attack. I felt that was a little bit too much as well, so I took it down just a little bit. And then these are only for filtering, so I would use this for a low pass to automate a low pass on the kick. And then I would use this as a high pass to take it down. I feel like sometimes using EQ bands as filters gives a little bit of a different result as compared to using a actual filter plugin. I have used a filter plugin here, as you can see, a couple of them, but it kind of depends on the result you want. There's a little bit of a resonance to it sometimes, so that can kind of help depending on the context in which your kick is playing. Now moving on, I have a Saturn here, and that Saturn basically just kind of, it was a little tip that my good friend Alex Wright shared with me. He's a great producer, and he told me to try this out. I tried it on the kick and it seemed to work. So what this does, I can't really explain it, but it sort of makes the low end a little tighter, similar to compression. But compression tends to usually take a little bit of the low end off. This plugin doesn't actually. So it kind of makes the low end a little tighter, but without taking any of it away, which I found interesting. And usually, I think a lot of producers can relate when I say sometimes I have no idea what I'm doing. But this was something that I decided to try, and it worked, so I kept it. If it sounds good, why not? And these are all just filters. Mostly this is just volume, filter, filter, filter. This is a delay, which is actually interesting because this is the first time I've done this. So what this is for is in the intro and the outro, over here and over here. I have a little bit of an automated delay on the kick. I'll show you a little bit of what that sounds like, but this is something that I came up with, and I'm probably going to use that in future tracks as well. But here's what it sounds like. So if you missed that, that was a little sort of a ping-pong-ish delay on the kick. I'll actually solo the kick so you can hear it by itself. So very interesting effect. It's not groundbreaking by any means. A lot of people have done it before, but I just found it to be to add a little more interest to the intro, I guess. Now, so that's for the kick. As you can see, it's also mono over here, fully mono. I always mono the kick, and actually also the sub bass as well. These are always both on mono. Now moving on to these are all actually just variations, because I have kick hits in the build-up. I have kick hits, just random kick hits that hit at different transitions in the track. And to actually control the volume of those, I needed to clone that kick and sort of change up the volumes of each kick individually so that it works for each specific transition I use it in. And there's actually a reverse kick hit as well. I'll show you quickly what that sounds like. So this comes in pretty handy for some transitions. Now for some loops, I have about 8 loops over here. I don't use them all at the same time. Some of them only play in the intro. Some of them only play in the drop. Some of them only play in the outro, and so on. So I can quickly go through each individual loop and show you what that sounds like. Starting with loop number 1, which comes in with the full percussion line over here. So as you can see, there's not much going on this one. The EQ is a little bit crazy though, because it needed a lot of shaping, but I did like the groove of the loop. So as you can see, it's a bit of a mess over here. Took down quite a bit of the high end, because that's usually taken care of by the hi-hats. And I also have a bunch of other loops that are playing, but I did like some of the sort of higher mids of that loop, and the groove as well. It kind of added a little bit of movement, so I kept it. This one actually only plays in so it plays throughout the track, just not in the intro and not in the last bit of the outro. Moving on to loop number 2. So just a little bit of a auto pan going on this one. Now, similar to loop, so loop 1 and loop 2 both have some auto panning going on. This one has a little bit of a saturation as well to boost the highs. That was loop number 1, and this is the auto panning. And then this one also has some auto panning, this time using LFO tool. And it has some, I actually took down the stereo on this one, so the stereo image of this specific loop number 2 was not balanced in terms of left and right. So having it as it is, stock, wasn't really working well for the track, but I did like the loop, so I actually made it mono with this over here. And well, up until 10K, it's in mono. The really sort of bright highs I left open, and then this is a little bit too well. What this does is basically gives it a little bit more warmth, because I felt it was a little too high-endish for the track as well. And then there's nothing going on EQ wise aside. I should probably take those away, but there's only a high pass going on at 200, and that's it. in terms of EQ. And this is the auto panning that I talked about. So it pans 50% left, 50% right, and it does that over the course of one bar. So it kind of does each cycle in one bar. And that's it for loop number 2. And then going on to loop number 3. So this one is just more for the mids, I guess, for a little bit more it's a little more percussive, not as much hi-hat presence. This gives a little more beef to the percussion line. This one has some compression to give. This is just, I was going through the presets, and this one, obviously this is tweaked, but this one seemed to be a good place to start, and so I built off of this preset over here. It is heavily compressed because I felt the dynamic range of this specific loop was a little bit all over the place. And my percussion line for this track is a little tight, so it needed a little bit more control in terms of EQ. Again, just really simple. Just pull down on the mids because they might have been a little too strong. And then it's just a basic high pass at 250. I found that this actually, when I actually heard the loop for the first time, I'll show you what it sounds like without this. So as you can hear, it changes up the sound of the loop quite a bit. Now, when I first heard the loop, I actually thought that this could work very well as a percussive loop. But once I actually placed it down in the mix, I felt like it needed to be even more percussive. And I've been using camel fat for quite a while now. So I know sort of what to do to get certain results and what I can make or what I can get out of this plugin. So I thought I could probably end up with something good with this preset. It's obviously also tweaked. I rarely ever use presets as they are. So in any plugin or synthesizer. So I actually tweaked this plugin, but again, it was a good place to start because it sort of gave me the result I was looking for. In terms of this is sort of the same issue I was having with this, with the second loop, where the stereo image as it was not balanced. However, I took a little bit of a different approach to this loop, where I actually tried to balance it using the S1 Imager, which is a great plugin for that. And then once I actually balanced it, which is a little bit of a left and right balance, I gave it a little more width, and about 1.5. The default would be 0. Let's see. Yep. So I gave it quite a bit of width over here, 1.5, and then that's about it for this loop. And then moving on to this, as you'll notice, this is a little bit mono. And obviously the key here is to generally balance your loops so that you have a sort of a balanced stereo image with all your loops combined. So some are going to be wide, some are going to be centered, some are going to be going left to right in terms of auto panning, as you saw with the first two. Some are not going to have any auto pan and are just going to be centered, like this one right here. And this is what it sounds like. Now, as you can see, there's not much going on this one. There's just some compression. Again, for the same exact purpose, I have compression on some of the other loops to have a little bit more controlled in terms of dynamic range, and then and kind of push it through the mix a little more. And then just the high pass at 200, so nothing fancy. So that, as you could probably notice, the key to having a good sound is to start with choosing the right samples that kind of work together. Obviously, some of the other ones have quite a bit more processing on them, but I think overall they work together pretty well. Now moving on to loop 5, we have this. Now, as you can hear, it's not really that, it's not that much. It doesn't really have any hi-hats in it. Well, it probably did before I used this on it, so let's check that out. So as you can hear, quite a difference here, and it's probably sort of the same result that I wanted with that other loop where I wanted to make it more percussive. Actually ended up with a nicer sound for this one in terms of having some flanger on it, which I think gives it a little bit more movement and kind of drives the percussion line a bit more without kind of taking too much spotlight in terms of hi-hats. Compression once again, and a little bit of EQ, taking down the a little bit of the mid-range, well, quite a bit of the mid-range, and some of the highs as well, because the whole point of this loop is to have it a little bit more in the background, and to just kind of help give a little bit more movement to the to help the bass line and the percussion line as well, but not be too present or forward in the mix. Moving on to loop number 6, which actually plays a little bit earlier. There's a little bit of volume automation and filter automation going on there. So as you can hear, this one is a little more hi-hat based. There's just a little bit of panic to balance it because to me, that's all it took. It wasn't too crazy, it was just a little off as it came in the sample pack. Same thing, compression, give it a little bit more sustain because I think the original sound of the loop was a little more transient based, and I didn't really like that. You can hear what that sounds like right now. So as you can hear, it kind of gives it a little bit more sustain, and then just some EQ, high pass, and then took down a little bit of the mids. Well, higher-ish mids, I guess, around 650. And so a little bit of where the beef is, because I felt that this area was already covered by a lot of the other loops, and then took down a little bit of the highs as well. These are all frequencies that, this isn't something that the solid numbers that I knew about kind of going into the track. You kind of mold and shape each loop and each sound you have in the track to fit best in the mix. And obviously this took a lot of experimentation, finding out where the sweet spot was. So without this is what the loop would sound like. And then with. So as you can hear, it really it does take away a lot from the loop, but that was my intention with this specific loop. It does have some auto pan on it as well. You'll notice I do that with a lot of sounds. And then this is just a filter, a low pass filter for some specific parts, like right here when it comes in for the first time. And then moving on to loop 7, which plays only in mostly in the drop, and then a little bit of the intro and the outro and the intro as well. So a little bit of auto panning on that as well, 35% over 1 bar, left and right. This gives it a little bit more presence in the mix. You can check what that sounds like right now. So it kind of evens it out, gives the high end a little bit more presence, and takes away a little bit from the mids, slightly from the body of the loop, which again was the point. So I try to usually find, use each loop for a specific sound range, some for their highs, some for their mids. I will actually rarely use a loop as it is, use both the mids and the highs of the same loop together. And then for the EQ, as you can see, I took down quite a bit of the mids for the most part, and a little bit of the highs as well, because, like I said, I wanted mostly the highs, Now the highs of this loop were actually quite a bit stronger than they sound like right now, so I had to take them down as well. But the intention was to take down, or to not have as much mids for this loop in the mix. Now this is crazy. I don't really recommend doing any of this, but for me, it kind of worked out, so not complaining, honestly. Now for the last loop over here, I have this one. So this one is probably the most present loop in the mix. I would say it gives a lot of high end, and it really helps the hi-hat in the mix based on the groove and the sound of the actual hi-hats in this loop. So in terms of EQ, there's not much going on. You'll see it seems to be I either have some crazy EQ going on or almost none at all. For this one, it's just a simple high pass. However, in the drop, in the intro and the outro, these kick in, so these are automated. I think actually this one isn't, but well, let's see. Yeah. Yeah, so right here, so this is actually automated, so there's a bit of a dip in the mids during the intro and the outro. And the reason for that is because I felt like in the intro and the outro where there's a little less going on in terms of sounds and energy, the loop was a little too strong. And then in the drop where sort of everything is on full volume, full cutoff, everything plays together, it gets really busy. I actually took this off, disabled this, so that the loop can come through a whole lot better. Because obviously, when you have everything kind of playing at the same time, the hi-hats kind of start getting drowned out. So I have to take this off to be able to hear this loop a little bit more and have a bit of a stronger hi-hat presence. So that's what this is. And then we have some auto panning. Same thing, 40%. Bar. Again, these are just numbers that I just experiment with. So it's nothing that I use, that I keep the same for every track. It changes. And then that's it for the loops. Now, as for the loop bus, there is quite a bit here. So there's some more compression to give them a bit more presence and strength in the mix. And then this is actually from Waves, where I gave them a little bit more on the lower end, bit more mids. This is a little bit more high end. There's not much going on, but actually I find even if you turn this on and then have this at 0, it does help a little bit. And this is some a bit more compression over here. I found that this is a little bit of a different type of compression than using Pro C. And so again, whatever sounds good. And then this is a little bit of a push on the attack. So it's very minor, very subtle. It's only an 0.5, as you can look top left over there. So it's only an 0.5 boost, but I found that it does help when obviously this is applied to all the loops. So 0.5 over 8 loops does add up. And then a little bit more EQ. This is automated to kick in the drop. So these two over here actually are enabled in the drop, and this is to give the loops a bit more high end as well, similar to what I had for loop number 8, and for the same reason pretty much for them to come through a little bit better. And here I have a sidechain, and this is my own sidechain preset that I did. As you'll notice, I don't have it at 100%. I have it at about 85. I rarely use this on full sidechain because obviously this is a bit of a sharp curve. So I can't have it at 100%. I only have it at 100 for the sub bass, which we'll get to later. And then here we have the open hi-hat, and it's right here. So just a standard hi-hat, nothing special. I don't think I've even changed any of these here. So the only thing on the hi-hat is an EQ, high pass, and a simple cut in the highs because I felt that this was a little bit of a resonant frequency. In the hi-hats, it had a little bit too much kind of boominess to it, so I took it down. It's only a dB, so it's not much. And this is actually to give a little bit of sustain because the hi-hat is pretty short. It's snappy. So in the drop, I decided to give it a little bit more sustain to make it a little longer. And this is actually automated to come into the drop. So this is enabled in the drop, and with it on, it sounds like this. So as you can hear, there's quite a bit of a difference here. And in the drop, it does definitely make a difference. And in terms of the closed hi-hat, this is just a simple kind of clicky sound to add a little bit more groove. I can show you the pattern here. So if you look over here, this is the hi-hat pattern. So I'll just disable these for a second. So as you probably can hear, it plays a little bit of a sort of left and right center pattern. I sort of did the same thing in my one of my previous tracks, Sun Gaze, and the way you do this is you just sort of lay down the pattern, and you just have to work on the pannings, individual pannings from here. So in this case, it goes center and then left and then center, right, and then same thing. It sort of repeats over a 1 bar long pattern. And then with the offbeat hi-hat, it sounds like this. So it kind of works pretty well with the hi-hat pattern, with the main hi-hat, offbeat hi-hat pattern. And then this is just a second offbeat open hi-hat, which I felt helped the main offbeat hi-hat come through a little bit better in the mix. So it sort of complements it. It's a lot lower in volume, and it's sent to the same channel as the open hi-hat that we just talked about. And this is what it sounds like. So together they sound like this. So as you can hear, this second hi-hat here kind of gives the main open hi-hat a bit more body, more in the mid region, and a little bit more presence as well. And then moving on to the ride, we have this one here. And there's nothing special going on with this one. It's just a high pass and then a slight cut. This is a resonant frequency that I found. And then this is just a little bit to take down the presence a little bit because I felt the ride was a little too bright in the mix without this on. So I had to take it down. And then this is a gain which comes in the drop. So what happens is over here, as you can see, the ride comes in, but obviously sort of to the same point as my hi-hats and the loop bus, where I had the automated boost on the highs. I actually did the same, sort of the same with the ride, but because I felt the highs of the ride were enough, I decided to make it a volume boost instead. So here it goes up about 1.5 dBs when it comes in the drop. And then this is just a filter. So that's it for the hi-hats and loops. And then we go into the hi-hat and loop bus. And then this is just a final EQ. I think this is probably automated, a high shelf that's automated in the drop as well. And then This is another high boost. This is for the drop as well, overall for everything. And so that kind of concludes it for the hi-hats and loops. Now we move on to the claps. There are 3 claps that I have, 3 different layers at different volumes, and they sound like this. So as you can hear, pretty clicky, sort of good attack, and some good decay as well. Obviously, I use them different ones for different reasons, and so the EQ is going to kind of show you that. The first and second claps are sent to the same channel, as you can see here, and this is what the EQ for those looks like. So just the high passes, you'll notice I mostly high pass things at around 200 or 150, because anything under that, unless it's from the kick or the sub bass, I don't really need. And then there's a little bit of a boost on the highs to give it some air, and then, or to give them both the claps, and then this gives them a little bit more warmth or more mid body range, I guess, because obviously they have to balance with the kick, and so I didn't, I felt without this there was a little bit of a gap in the mid range, and that sort of helps with that. And then for the third clap, it's just a simple EQ with a high shelf, again for the same reason, kind of give it more space or air, and then another high pass at 200. These are some things I just forgot to delete, so you can ignore those. And then for the claps, I have a little bit of compression to glue them together. It is a little bit of a heavy compression, but I felt that it was needed to kind of bring them together, make them sound as one clap. I had to do a little bit of a heavy compression, but the settings are pretty mild. It's a pretty relatively softer ratio, I guess. And then this is the same thing. This is for the drop. It's a gain boost, automated. And then for the percussion bus, there's just a filter on it, and that's about it. As you can see, I kind of like to arrange things in buses usually, because I feel like sometimes you want to process certain similar sounds using the same plugin, and instead of replicating this on every single channel, I found it obviously better for especially for CPU purposes to kind of have it on one channel instead. Same for the percussion. The claps kind of get filtered together, and that kind of makes it a little more cohesive and sound a bit more consistent when they get filtered, instead of having different filters on the different channels. And so that's it for the percussion overall. Moving on to the basses. Now, I guess this starts to get interesting. We can probably start off with the patterns first. So I actually ended up moving the basses into stems over here. Because sadly, as I mentioned before, the CPU had a lot of issues dealing with this track. It still does, actually, even with these. So you'll notice actually in the intro, I have the basses as stems and not MIDIs. The good thing is, it kind of sounds a bit more consistent. The sad thing is, obviously, you have to finalize the pattern of each bass, individual bass layer, unless you want to keep it going back and changing the individual basses. But I felt like, I had a good bass line going on a bit early on in the track, so I thought I would just finalize that and change it into stems. Obviously, gives it a little bit more consistency when you cut things off for certain transitions and so on. So starting with the first bass line, it is a Lush 101. It is a preset that I didn't make, but I tweaked, and it sounds like this. Let me just turn off the sidechain here for a second. So it's sort of more of a mid bass. Well, yeah, I named it mid bass, and obviously kind of gives more of the body of the bass line rather than the high end. So what I have going on in terms of the pattern is this. So very simple triplet pattern. The only thing is I actually just took off a little bit from the ending of each note, and that's to give a little bit of a margin or some time for the attack of the next note to be heard properly, because I feel like if I actually extended it all the way, then it would have probably melted too much into the other notes. You wouldn't be able to hear the attack too much. But that's that for the for this bass line. There's really nothing special going on. But in terms of mixing, we have just an EQ. There's nothing at all. Just a high pass, just to take away all the unnecessary low end, and then a dip in the highs, because the high end of this bass line specifically, or bass preset, I did not like, and I have other basses taking care of the highs, and so I took down the high end of this quite a bit here, around 10K by 7 dB, and that's it for this specific bass. And then moving on to bass number 2. And as you can see, this is just Aspire. I can't remember where this preset is from, but originally I think this ARP was on. Yeah, I think this ARP was on because it's a sequence. But then I actually disabled it and made it a pattern. Just a simple triplet based pattern over here. The only thing is there's a little bit of velocity play, and that's just kind of randomizing a little bit, just based off how the different layers interact with each other. So these are just kind of random, and it's sort of a triplet pattern, but then there's a bit of a groove going on with these holes here, but nothing special, still pretty standard, nothing crazy here. Moving on to the mixing. Again, just an EQ. At 175, there's a high pass, and then I took this down because usually when you have a high pass at a certain frequency, with some certain EQs, there's a little bit, the section lower, just under that high pass, still plays, and that section actually happened to be resonant, so I had to take it down a little bit because I felt like it was still coming through. I could have actually just pushed this high pass a bit higher, but I felt any higher than this, it would have taken too much out of the actual body of the bass, so I had to keep it over here. There's just a dip in the mids where this is actually just another resonant section here, and then a bit of, I think this area was a bit nasal. It sounded like you're kind of underwater or something, because with this specific texture of a bass, that sort of aspect, the nasal aspect, was a little highlighted, so I had to take this section down over here. But that's it. There's just an EQ. And then moving on to bass number 3. So this is actually playing just exactly the same pattern as, I think the same pattern as the second bass I just showed you. I think the only difference is probably I just have these notes a little shorter over here. And then there's a bit of velocity. I probably just copied the pattern actually because it sounded good. And I think this one would probably be, let's see. It's another Aspire, but it's one that I made on my own. And just, yeah, there's just an EQ over here. Same thing as before, just a bit of a dip in the mids as well, but that's it. Doesn't seem to be much going on in terms of the bass line mixing over here, each individual layer, because I do have a bass bus, and I think I did most of my processing over here. Now moving on to bass number 4. So just a standard rolling bass line, but a bit of a octave play as well. I think I kind of ripped this specific layer from one of my older projects, but it seemed to work for this track, so I kept it. And this one is, I won't be going through all the sounds I've used in terms of synths, but I'm just probably the basses are okay. So this one is again a silence preset that I made myself. Has a bit of white noise as well, but I probably took down maybe a bit of the high end. But let me see. Oh, I didn't. Okay, so yeah, so these are all resonant frequencies that I found to be present specifically in this bass. There's a bit of a boost in the highs to give it more presence, because this is sort of a mid to a high bass, so it kind of helps the highs as well. And then a high pass at 200, and then for bass number 5 or high bass 1. I think I might have been playing these basses a bit filtered, but anyway, this one, as you can hear, has a lot of highs over here. There's just a bit of a compressor, and this one I think was from Sungaze as well, this layer. So I kind of imported the settings that I've had from there and tweaked them to match to work for this track. In terms of the EQ, there is just a high pass over here, dip in the mids, which I sometimes do for layers or sounds that have too many or too much mids. And obviously, because this is meant to be a high bass as well, the mids for it are supposed to not be as strong as the other basses. There's a boost in the highs, and as you see, there are 2 boosts in the highs, one at 3K and one at 10K. And then there's a bit of a takedown of an attack here, because in the previous Sungaze, I think is the track I used this in before. I'm not really sure if I have this on for Sungaze, but I think for Sungaze the whole point was to have a sharp, attacky bass line. For this one, this specific layer, I did not feel it really helped, so I had to take down the attack actually. And then for the sub bass, full monos, you can see here's what it sounds like. So a lot of warmth, and at the same time, quite a bit of attack on it as well. It's also kind of pretty tight in terms of the pattern. As you see, it's just a simple sort of double offbeat kind of thing, offbeat and then right before the next hit. And I took down or took away a little bit of the ending from the notes, for the same reason I mentioned before, just so the attack of each note can be heard a little bit better. And then in terms of mixing, we have just a bit of a balance of the low end here, because I think the low end for this specific sub bass was too strong, and obviously you kind of want to roll off the lows a little bit for the sub bass usually, just so it's a little smoother. So I actually have a roll off from 30 downwards, and then from 450 upwards, because obviously the higher part of this section here is taken care of by the mid and high basses. And these are some certain resonant frequencies these are specific values actually that I looked up based on the root note that the bass line is playing. And so I took them down because I felt these specific areas were too strong in the sub bass in specific. So took them down a little bit around 3 dB. And then R bass, I think some of you probably seen this being used on sub basses quite a bit. I don't think anyone can properly explain what it actually does, but it kind of gives a little bit more harmonics, I think, to the bass line, or to the sub bass. I think it works best on sub basses usually. Kind of gives more harmonics, kind of shapes up the low end quite a bit differently, makes it work better with the kick. I can just play it for you, and you can see what it sounds like with and without. So as you can see, quite a bit of a change there. The low end is a lot more present with it on, and then it kind of maybe gives it a little bit more attack as well, makes it sharper. So that's for the sub bass, and that's really it for the bass line. Obviously now we can get into acids and stuff, and I guess that's still part of the bass line, but in terms of the main core basses, that's what they sound like, and on their own, that's what the bass line sounds like. So some of the basses have some delay on them, some don't. Some have a slight bit of reverb, and mostly they're pretty dry. And then I think where the magic really happens is the acids, because this sort of plays the core pattern, and then the acids kind of fill out the holes, and the acids have a lot of reverb and delay on them. So I guess that's kind of what gives the bass line a bit more depth. And more movement, I guess. So we could go through the acids one by one as well. Oh, well, actually, let's go through the bass bus. So for the bass bus, there's a bit of compression to kind of glue the layers together. And then one off adder, this is actually a plugin from Waves. It's sort of a bit of I don't know, maybe like a shortcut, I guess, to make your bass line sound a bit fatter. I'm not using it too much though. It's just around 1.5. It kind of beefs up the mids or the body of your bass line. And then one knob brighter, which probably self-explanatory at this point, kind of gives the bass line a bit more brightness. And this is as well on one, so not really that much. In terms of side chaining, around 85% as well. For this, for all the basses, they all go into this the bass bus except for the sub bass, and then the sub bass has its own sort of processing going on, including its own sidechain. And then so this one, yeah, has a sidechain. I'm using pretty much the same sidechain preset for every sound in the track. It's just the only thing that changes is how much it's sidechained, and that I control that with this knob over here. And then all these, so the sub bass and the bass bus both go into a drum and bass bus, which has percussion, my kick, my sub, and all the basses as well. And then I think the acids is probably as well. I think these directly go into the, yeah, they do. So all of them go into the drum and bass bus over here. Now, in terms of the acids, we can start off with the first one. We can check the pattern for that first. Yeah, so here's what the first acid sounds like. So as you can see, it takes up a lot of space in the mix, and that's intentional. So it kind of fills the holes, as you can probably hear. So there's some ping pong delay going on left and right. And then there's also a bit of reverb on it, and that's all from the synth. In terms of processing, there is quite a bit for this one because obviously it takes up a lot of room. And I had to cut away a little bit from it because the high end was just too powerful, and it kind of covered the percussion and covered the other bass line. So I had to kind of high cut, actually, instead of so I took it down over here, but then more towards the highs, I kind of just had to cut it off. And then there's a bit of a cut down here as well, because this is one of those frequencies where, again, it kind of sounded a bit nasalish. And especially with acids, they can get a bit nasal very quickly because of the resonance and all that. Same thing for this frequency, and then a bit of a cut in the mid, or dip in the mids, and a high pass at 200. And then this is just some auto panning. I have it at 35% over a bar, and this is just to kind of give it some kind of bounce between left and right. Because again, I have my other bass layers kind of taking room in the middle and so on, and so obviously I need to have a bit more contrast in terms of the acids, kind of have them play on the sides rather than in the middle where most of the basses are playing. So that's it, and then this is just some side chain, probably around 70%, I think, maybe, or 75. Yeah, 75. And then for the second acid, so this one plays over here with the main bass line, and I have acid number 3 playing with the bass line. Acid number 2 only plays in the intro and the outro. Actually, just the intro here, and then here before the breakdown and the outro as well. And then I have an acid number 4, which is in the second half of the intro, which I'll go through. But then for the most part, I think I can show you acid number 2 really quick. It's just the standard Spire preset. I can't remember what bank I found it in. But I had to disable some of the oscillators. These were actually on, I think. But I had to disable them because I didn't like these specific sounds. And so it kind of goes to the point of always tweaking presets. The reverb I left on. The delay I probably made my own because for this one, the point was to have a bit of a long and present delay. So I added my own delay to it right here. So as you can hear, the delay on that is really long and strong. So kind of taking you through the settings over here, I have it's some ping pong delay going on. In terms of the level, I have it at 70 in terms of feedback, and then I have the dry wet at 1.6 to 0.4. Well, there's a bit of a low cut going on because I don't want any of that nasty low end being delayed. And then there's a filter, I think. Yeah, that's a filter, probably a low pass. And then in terms of EQ, this is resonant, or nasal, more nasalish. And then this is just the high pass. And then this is, again, just a side chain. So pretty standard once again. And then moving on to acid 3, this is what it sounds like. So as you can hear, it kind of changes up every bar. It has a lot of movement to it, and I think this acid goes pretty well with acid number 1. In terms of processing, there's just an EQ where I have a high pass at 325. Again, these are just rough numbers that I just ended up rounding after experimenting with. And then I just took down, this is probably just an SD frequency, this here as well. And then there's just sidechain over here. In terms of the preset, I left the delay and the reverb on the from the actual synth. So as you can see, this is another sort of like ARPish bass. This was actually, I think, the original preset sounded was more meant to sound like an actual like pluck or pluck sequence, but I actually made it tweaked it to sound like an acid. And the reverb and the delay are, as you can see, still enabled. And then for the last acid, this one plays in the intro, and I'll just show you what it sounds like from here. So this one kind of it plays under everything else in the intro. This is before the bass line even kicks in. And it's sort of meant to show that there's something going on underneath all that clutter, but you can't quite make out what it is on purpose. It's sort of just a standard acid, I guess. And in terms of processing, I just have my own delay on it. Same settings as acid number 2. And then in terms of EQ, these are probably all just resonant frequencies. And then I did not like the highs at all. And I think not cutting out the highs kind of made it have a little too much spotlight, more than I was wanting to give it. So I cut out all the highs above 5K, and then cut out all the lows under 200 and rolled them off, or took down a bit of the resonance as well. And then this is, again, just a side chain, same preset, just a different value. And that's it for the acids, really. And then we go into, I don't know what to really call these. I just call them baseline support, because they're more like just sequences, I guess, but sample sequences that kind of are meant to complement the bass line. Now, I'll show you what each one sounds like, but I think they work pretty well with the bass line. Here's the first one. So it's sort of like a bass playing with an acid, is what it sounds like to me. And it goes pretty well with the other basses. Obviously, this is actually in the key of the bass or the root note of the bass line that's bringing the intro. I had to actually manually duplicate them and shift them to play the bass line sequence in the drop. But we'll get into that later. For now, I just have these playing in the intro. So that's the first one. In terms of processing, there's a cut and a dip around the same frequency, because over here, if I go any higher, it'll take away too much body from this sound. But then even lowering down the Q for the actual high pass was still not enough. I felt like there was a bit too much mid presence. And again, remember, I have about 5-6 layers of bass already, so I wasn't really adding this for the mids. I was adding this to kind of give a bit more movement to the bass line as well. A lot of stuff going on to give movement to the bass. And then there's just a side chain as well. There's nothing else. And then for the second one, this is what it sounds like over here. So this is like a plucky, percussive type sound. I liked it a lot, actually. I felt like it gave the overall presence of the bass line a bit more attack, and it showed you, it kind of also worked well with the percussion line as well. And so for that, I have an EQ. Took down a lot of the mid-range, because again, all I wanted was mostly the highs or the attack, which is mostly, well, the highs of the attack, which are more in the high end. And then I had a lot of the sort of dynamic range taken down, because as you could probably hear, this sort of has a lot of fluctuations in terms of dynamic range. This is after compression. Now before compression, it was even even crazier. So I had to keep it in check. This is kind of to give a little bit more of that mid body back, but at the same time not go overboard with that. And then this is just, again, sidechain. And then the last bassline support layer sounds like this. So as you can hear, this actually has a little bit of reverb on it. I don't know, I think this is a mix between like a Congo, like a tonal Congo sound, some like African drums maybe, but that's kind of what it sounds like to me. But I think I was more interested in the pattern that it played, because it was a little bit groovy and it worked pretty well. I'll show you what these three sound like together right now. So as you can hear, this kind of sounds like a bass line on its own. In combination with the other basses, I think kind of makes for a solid bass line overall. In terms of the EQing, I just have a high pass and a little bit of a cut here, and then just a side chain. Actually, if you want to hear what all the basses sound like together, I can play that for you right now. I think with the acids as well, maybe. So as you can hear, those three bassline support layers really make a big difference. Kind of bring the bassline more forward and give it a bit more presence in the mix. And then lastly, like I mentioned earlier, actually, I did end up duplicating the first and second layers of this, and I pitched them. Well, this is the root, this is the main one, and then this is pitched down, and then this is pitched even further down, and then lastly this is up, and this sort of is, it's sort of an octave thing. I'll play with these sound like right now, but I wanted these layers to play with the bass line and the drop, because I felt like these two layers kind of, they felt like an essential part of the bass line, and not having them, it didn't really make sense to have those in the intro and not have them in the drop, where everything sort of plays together and it gets busy and it's full energy. So you kind of want to have those play to kind of give the bass line the most energy that you can. So here is the progression that they play. I'll play it for you right now. So as you can hear, they play the sort of the exact same sequence as the actual drop bass line. The only difference is obviously these are samples, not MIDI. So kind of had to go out and pitch each one individually. I did not do it for the third one because the third one didn't really work that way. I tried duplicating it and seeing if it would work pitched. Playing that progression, but it didn't work, so you can't really force it, so I kind of took them away. So that's it for the bass line. Now moving on to the actual melodic sounds of the track. I don't have that many actually, but we can start off maybe with the plucks that I've used, starting off with the intro pluck, I think, or well, there's a harmony pluck that plays in the intro. It sounds like this. So a lot of reverb and a lot of delay as well. I'll actually play this again and have the delay plugin open. So as you can hear, it does have a long delay tail to it. Now this pluck is actually interesting because it's a combination of two different plucks playing harmonized notes together. I'll take you to the pattern for that in a second. So as you can see right here, you can see two different plucks, harmony pluck 1 and 2, and then the second one is playing at a lower volume than the first one. They are both sent to the same channel though, so they have the same processing. Right here, they have their own reverb send as well. And then this is what the first pluck is playing. So this is the sort of like the higher end of the harmony being played by this pluck, and then I have the lower end of the harmony being played by the second pluck at a lower volume, and this is what it sounds like. So together they play together very nicely. I think obviously without the higher harmony, the lower one sounds a little bit strange. But I mean, there is no set way for choosing these notes. Obviously, you have to kind of know a little bit about how harmonies work. But if you have a vision for a certain sound in your head, you just have to put it down. I kind of got the idea from just sort of listening to different tracks, and I thought, would be cool because I listened to some different types of music as well where there's a lot of presence of harmonies, and I think, I thought it would be interesting to kind of bring that to a trance pluck. So I came up with this idea and I kind of picked out the notes that would work together, and they worked out pretty well. Now, as you can see, there's a little bit of a velocity play here, but this isn't controlling the volume for this specific pluck. This is actually controlling the cutoff, and the way I have it set up is that the velocity from the synth modifies the cutoff, and so these notes actually play at the same volume. They are at the same volume, but they play at different cutoffs, and this is on purpose. I kind of wanted to have a bit of an interesting effect with this pluck, and especially because you have such a long delay on the notes. If you have all the notes sort of around the same cutoff and a high cutoff, you'll get a little bit of a clutter of notes, and I didn't really want that, so I just ended up kind of muffling out the notes that I don't really want to highlight in the delay, and it kind of accenting the notes that I want to actually highlight in the delay. So this is for the harmony Plucks. Now in terms of processing, I just have a bit of compression, and then this same delay that I discussed. It's a half delay, it's not a quarter delay, which is what I usually use. It has ping pong on, and it has quite a bit of dry wet. I think the default is around 1.4 to 0.6. This goes up a little bit higher, so, and then there's a little bit of a boost on the delay just to give the delay a bit more volume and the overall sound. You'll notice that I also have some high cut and low cut settings. Again, because I want to control, because it's such a long delay, it's important to have it a little more restricted or a little more controlled, where the delay won't cover other instruments or other sounds. And then after that, we have an EQ. And I sort of made this preset on my own. After tweaking, and I saved it so I can use it again. Actually, it gives it a little bit more distortion. So this specific preset that I made was designed to give more distortion or more edge to the Plucks. And I think it did that pretty well. And then this is gives a bit more attack and more sustain to the Plucks. And then it gives a bit more gain as well, volume meaning. And then, so what I think ended up happening, if I remember correctly, was when I added in the camel fat, and then the delay went in through the camel fat, the distortion on the delayed notes really kind of gave them a bit too much low end or mids. So I had to take that out with another EQ after the camel fat. And that's why there's an EQ at 250 here. It's just a high pass. But that's what that's for. And then there's a sidechain. There isn't really that much sidechain on it because this pluck, it's only a 4-note pluck, so it's not a consistent pattern that's playing. So I didn't really feel like it needed a strong sidechain. It's really subtle, just so it can kind of pump or groove or swing with the track, but not where you'd hear it enough for it to be a little too muffled or a little less present in the mix. And then for the reverb, I have an Arts Acoustic, and then I've been using this preset for quite a long time now, probably 4 or 5 years. I've always tweaked it. I've never used it as it is. But these are the settings I have. There's a high cut and low cut on the reverb, so nothing under around 200 hertz plays and nothing above 11,000, because I feel like anything above this, for this specific sound and in the context it's in, I did not really need. And then I've always kind of leave the high ratio around 4,000 hertz because anything above that I usually want to decay faster, a lot faster than the rest of the sound, because typically for Plucks or vocals above 4,000 or above 6,000, something like that, is a lot of hiss, and that can tend to make the mix a little bit harsh. So I took that out. And then there's an EQ on the reverb itself. And as you can see, this is going into the reverb here. And then this is just, oops. And then this is just a high pass at 200, nothing special. And then for this one here, there's a sidechain. It's very subtle though, because sidechaining the reverb too much takes the life out of it. So it's only at 20%, where it's a little controlled and it's still pumping with the beat, but not too strong where it kind of disappears in the mix. And this is mainly for the harmony Plucks. Now moving on to some other sounds. We have the main R pluck, which plays in the intro, and I think this is probably the best pluck in the track. Well, I'll just play the pattern from here. If I can find it right here. So as you can hear, this is probably the most present pluck in the track as well. I think if I remember correctly, I can't remember what bank this is from, but obviously tweaked, disabled the reverb and the delay from there because I did not really like how they sounded. I made my own, and over here we have, well, I'll take you through the delay first, I guess, since I mentioned it. It's a quarter note delay, and then the ping pong panning is not all the way on. I think it's only about 50%. Yeah, 50%. And the reason for that is I already have another pluck that's sort of playing at full ping pong delay, and I didn't want the delays for those two to kind of interfere or work against each other. There's also a little bit of stereo separation. There's a bit of stereo separation on the pluck to kind of make it wider in the stereo field, because to kind of give it more spotlight, which is the whole point of this pluck. Now in terms of EQ, I have high pass at 225, and then these are just kind of little notches in the mids for resonance, and a little boost in the highs for a bit more clarity. This is again done with the intention, a bit of saturation for the highs to give it more presence in the mix as well. And then this one, even more stereo separation. Well, this one goes into the main stereo separation, so this actually separates the overall sound after it kind of goes out the mixer channel. And then I have this one here, which is at around 150%. So by default, it's at 100. So this is really like a 50% boost. And then I have my delay, which is we already talked about. And then we have the sidechain at around, I think, 65%. Same preset as I mentioned earlier. And then that's about it for this pluck, really. It has its own reverb send. Well, I'll cover this pluck in a minute, but both of them have the same reverb send. So this one has a low cut at around 500 hertz. Nothing under that plays, and then it has a pretty long decay because I kind of wanted the pluck to feel a bit sort of dreamy, or kind of have a long reverb tail to kind of fade the notes into each other. And then the same thing I talked about where the highs have a lot of hiss, so I have them decaying pretty fast. Nothing under 481 as I mentioned, and that's about it. There's some EQ here, again only a high pass, above 200. There's actually a roll off, and as you can see the roll off kind of goes down to about 100, or maybe, I don't know, 75, something like that. And so really, if you set it to, 480, 500, it still lets a lot lower than that, up to maybe 100 or 150. So just to kind of make sure, that I have nothing under 200, which is just a bunch of useless low end. I added another EQ to take it down. And then I have a sidechain probably at 20%. I think I usually sidechain my reverbs at 20%. So this is usually my standard now. And then I have that second pluck. Now, for that second pluck, I'll go to the pattern right here. It sounds like this. So as you can hear, it has a lot of delay to it as well, and it's a tremolo pluck sort of. And so here's what the pattern for that looks like right here. So now, as you can see, the lengths of the notes are pretty short at first, and then they get longer and then longer, and there's a little break here. And then it's just a interesting pattern that I came up with. I haven't really heard it much anywhere else, but it seemed to work for the track pretty well. This is again a velocity a cutoff thing, so the velocity is linked. It should be linked to the cutoff from the synth. There we go. And so when I actually modify the cutoff, the velocities from here, that means every note plays at a different cutoff. And so as you can see, these two notes, these two play at the same cutoff, and then these two play at the same cutoff, and then these two, and this one's the highest, so this one kind of rings out in the delay the most, and then it kind of goes down again over here, and these are the exact same velocities for these notes. It's just a different notes, but different values for the velocities. So a bit of an interesting pattern here. And then we have, in terms of processing, it goes into the same reverb as the main R pluck. In terms of EQ, there's just a high pass at 225 and a similar boost to the highs as the main R pluck for the same reason. And then pattern, this is a little bit of saturation as well for a bit of extra high boost. And then we talked about the delay before. The difference between this and the last pluck is when this one is panned all the way, and then obviously these values are different, and the low cuts and high cuts are different. The feedback, as you can see, is relatively high because I wanted to, the whole aim of this delay was, you kind of have to see this here. So this is the main R pluck right here. And then this is the supporting pluck, I guess the tremolo pluck. So the whole point was to have the delay of this tremolo pluck last for the entire period until the next bunch of notes come in. So it lasts for about 3.5 bars, just about. And that's a long time. I had to really boost the the feedback. But at the same time, you kind of have to make it, for something that has a delay that long, you kind of have to control the low cuts and high cuts to make sure that nothing unwanted passes through. So nothing under 250, and then you have to kind of play around with this to make sure that the delay ends right before the next bunch of notes comes in. So I had to really take my time with this, but I think it worked out pretty well. Now, a bit of an interesting thing on this pluck is that when it starts to get to the bridge before the breakdown, I actually fade out the volume of the delay. So the delay goes down. I can show you what that sounds like here. So as you can hear, the delay immediately stopped. And I think this is something that I recently learned, cutting off the tails of certain effects between transitions, because I didn't want the delay to be bleeding into the bridge section here, just to make it a cleaner transition. So I actually cut down, there's a bit of a high tension here, around 55. That's because I kind of wanted to be a sudden volume decay rather than a gradual, because then the delay would be gone a little too soon. So I kind of had it in a way where the delay kind of kept playing until the last minute, and then it kind of went down. Just a bit of an interesting thing here. Kind of makes this transition cleaner, takes away the pluck entirely as soon as this transition kind of comes in. And then that kind of covers it for this one. And then just a bunch of bit of sidechain. And then we go into the pads. So I have 1, 2, 3 pads. These are actually stems that I ended up making. I don't really need to go through those. So this main pad here, again, can't remember what bank this is from, but this pad right here is the main pad that plays. It is the pad that plays in the intro as well, Atmo Pad 1. And as you notice, I don't have any effects on here. I disabled all of them because I want to, usually for pads I like to make my own. And so I have a compressor, and then a bit of a crazy EQing action going on here. This pad seemed to be really muddy in terms of the mids, so I had to really take them down. And this really depends on how the actual sound is. So I don't do this for all pads. You'll probably notice for my other layers, the EQing is quite different, but it really depends on how the pad sounds as it sort of as an original sound. So I took down the mids, and then these are all, this is just a bunch of resonant frequencies, and this is just another cut at the root note of the main chord that the pad plays. The pad also had a whole bunch of high-end white noise that I didn't really want. I kept some of it, but I removed most of it because I think too much white noise usually, especially when the track is mastered, too much white noise kind of covers the track and kind of covers a lot of the other sounds that you have playing at the same time. And then this is just a filter, a low pass, and then sidechain. Just to quickly show you what this pad sounds like, I'll show you the pattern right here. So this is what it sounds like in the breakdown. So pretty simple, has a bit of reverb on it. Probably same preset, just tweaked it. So I loaded that preset I showed you earlier, and then I tweaked it to match or to work how I want it to sound in the track. So there's a bit of pre-delay. So actually the reverb takes a bit of time to kick in. So you hear the main chord, or you hear the actual dry sound first, and then the reverb starts coming in. And then a bit of EQ, because the pad, as I showed you earlier, is a bit resonant. I had to take down some of these frequencies in the reverb as well. And then this is just a bunch of sidechain. Now in the breakdown, the sidechain is disabled. And then it kind of, so I automated this, and then it kind of goes back up in the drop, and in the intro, it's at, well, let me see. So it's at around 20% once again. You'll notice that the sidechain on the actual pad also goes down in the breakdown. So this pad is obviously kind of takes a lot more space in the mix. It only plays in the breakdown, and it has a bit of a winterish, I don't know, feel to it. So this one only has an EQ on it, quite a bit of EQ, but just an EQ. So high pass at 175, slight dip in the mids for resonance, again for the root note of the main chord, and then These are all kind of mini resonant frequencies here. Same white noise issue, especially when the cutoff opens in the breakdown. Kind of took down the white noise on it, and then it's sent to a different reverb than the first pad. So this one is kind of like similar to that Pluck, but I think the main values are the same. And then same thing with the resonance. Obviously, if you have more than one pad sent to the same reverb, things tend to add up. So I took down the resonance because I felt when the three pads kind of played together, added up to a little too much resonance for me. So that's it for the second pad. Now for the third pad, here's what it sounds like. So this one is more for the mids, for the warmth. Obviously, as you can hear, the octave is a little bit low as well. This is just a little panning balance because I felt the original sound was a little too pan to the right. So I just moved it a little left, I guess. And then pretty much the same concept as the other pads. Slight resonance here, and then a cut in the mids, or high pass, sorry, around 250. And then it's sent to the reverb, same thing going on. And then there's a vocal pad over here, which plays this melody. So this is a little more subtle. You won't hear it too much, but it really helps give a little bit more spotlight to the higher notes and kind of balance the lower octave pad here. Now, I've used this pad in many tracks. It's one of my go-to sounds, and I've kind of fell in love with it as soon as I heard it the first time. So every single time I use it, I kind of make it better and tweak it a little bit to kind of become a little more polished. So I have a bit of compression here, and this value here, based on the same concept I had mentioned earlier about how long each chord lasts, because this is a pad. So whenever a chord ends, the compression cycle ends and it restarts. So again, this is based on calculation. And then I have a bit of EQ, a lot of resonance for this one, especially with a lot of reverb going on. And there's a high pass at 250 and a slight boost on the sides, actually. So this is changed into mid-side mode. So the sides are boosted at around 3500K, and kind of give more presence in the sides because a lot of these other pads are more centered. So this helps kind of give a bit more presence up for the highs in the sides. And then I have a bit of delay. Nothing fancy. I think I usually use most of the same settings every time. Low cut is at 150. High cut, I really took down the highs on this because usually, for this vocal pad, it can have a lot of hiss, especially with quarter note delay. So I took down the highs quite a bit here. And then this dry wet is the default. I didn't change it. And then this is a filter and some sidechain. Yeah, I do have it automated. In any case, the last pad we have is the bass pad. And I've used this bass pad in every single one of my tracks. It's my go-to bass pad. This is what the bass pad sounds like. As you can hear, it's pretty smooth, Now, the smooth transition from note to note is because I have a bit of portamento on it, which kind of makes the notes glide between each other instead of having a sharper attack. And I felt like this specific sound really worked well with the pads. Now together the pads sound like this. So pretty nice sounding together. In terms of the bass pad processing, I only have dip in the lows over here because I don't want the super subby low end. I kind of weighs the track down and makes the breakdown sound a little too low end based. And then this is a filter that only kicks in certain parts of the breakdown, I guess. So I have it automated here. Yeah, there we go. So sort of the note kind of fades in. In terms of the piano, it's just a Nexus piano, and it sounds like this. So this plays it towards the end of the drop, and the first time around it ends normally, and then the second time around, right before it goes into the outro, I have a little bit of a volume decay here as well. Again, for the same reason, just for a cleaner transition. So after the last note, it kind of fades away rather than kind of end randomly. Just another sort of thing to keep the transitions a bit cleaner. In terms of processing, firstly we start off with the compression, kind of make the attack stick out a little bit more, and kind of make it pop through the mix. And then we have an EQ. Now this specific piano, actually when I heard it for the first time, I loved the sound, but the problem was that it didn't really have strong high end. So I had to kind of work a lot on that and kind of make it my own, or make my own high end for it. So, well, obviously there's a bit of a high pass here at 300 because anything under that is just unnecessary low end. And then I felt like this was probably the sweet spot for the melody that I was playing, and to boost the highs on that. So if you'll notice, I can play the melody for you and solo this section here so you can hear exactly what's being boosted. So as you can see, this is where the high end starts to kind of die for the piano. So this is where I decided to boost in terms of high end. And then I went ahead and added a one knob brighter from Waves with almost a halfway boost for the highs. And then I added this for more of a high end boost. I'll play it again. Yeah, so basically there are two sections to this plugin. Obviously I picked out the piano bright preset, and then for the edge there are a lot of defaults that I enabled this, and then I enabled this as well. I disabled these two because I don't need that dip in the mids. I thought the mids were fine. And then this one as well, I enabled this as well. This is sort of basically a low pass, and I don't need a low pass. It's the opposite of what I want to get. And then for the warmth section, I kind of just tailored it to push these around until I kind of got a double high boost, I guess. So there's a bit of a high pass here as well, and then a boost on the highs around 8K. And then there's a delay. And then this is the volume automation that I was talking about for this section here before the outro. And then the sidechain, I did sidechain the piano because if I didn't, it won't really pump well with the beat. And I don't want it to kind of be just lying on top of the mix. I want it to kind of bounce around and groove with the rest of the track. So I added a bit of sidechain to that. And then that's about it, really. I mean, in terms of reverb, I have a reverb sent for it right here. And so that's for the piano. Now moving on to the leads, which is the last thing in the synth section here. Now this is kind of where it gets interesting. I have 1, 2, 3, and then this is 3 separate layers. So I have 6 layers in total. And you have a track that kind of has a lot of layering involved with, you know, like 6 basses and 3 acids and a lot of stuff. You kind of have to match the leads to be as big as the rest of the track. In terms of the first layer here, I have a pluck lead, and this is what it sounds like. So this kind of gives the attack of the leads that you hear, kind of pushes it to the front of the mix. And I think that is a silent preset that I that I made. And yeah, so as far as the mixing is concerned, there's just a EQ on it with a bit of mid taming. I think it sounded a bit nasal-ish around here. Compression, and then this is automated. Yeah, it is automated. So, so in the breakdown right here, right here, this is the pluck that plays. Now, I have an automated auto pan on it, so the auto pan is only 25%, and it's every 4 bars, and it plays, and it's only for this section here. And so it makes the pluck section a bit more interesting because there's not a whole lot going on in this section of the track. So I kind of wanted to make it interesting and have a little bit of auto pan on it. So I can show you real quick what that sounds like. So when I disable the delay, you can clearly hear it's kind of bouncing slightly between left and right. Not too crazy because I don't want that to be noticeable. I just want it to be just enough for it to make a difference. And so the delay on it is nothing fancy. Pretty much the same standard settings I usually use. And then this is a volume automation because, once again, for clean transition, before it goes into the leads, the pluck kind of fades out with a volume automation. So right here. So it kind of fades out smoothly that way. And I thought it worked pretty well because there's a vocal that plays in this section. And I kind of want that vocal to be at the forefront of the mix and not have the delay of the pluck kind of take away from it. So I ended up automating the delay or the volume of the lead, including the delay. So this is the volume after the delay. So the delay comes down as well with the with this volume automation, and this is just a sidechain. So moving on to the next sound or the next layer. So this is like a supporting layer. It plays in the breakdown as well with that with the pluck layer, and this is what it sounds like. So as you can hear when it opens up, there's a lot of low end in that one. High end in that preset. So this is just a Spire preset, and then a lot of the processing is done on the mixer. So there's a delay on the lead bus. So this is where the leads get their delay from, and then they have a reverb bus as reverb send. Now, for the support pluck, there's a bit of compression just to push the attack a little forward and kind of push the overall sound to the front of the mix as well. And then in terms of EQing, the sound was great as it is, so I kind of just used a high pass on it at 175, and that was it. And then going into the saw leads, just kind of a quick note here. Around the same time where I mentioned that the plug volume goes down, I actually automated the volume of the reverb as well, right here. So you'll notice that this goes down as well. And so it kind of fades away just like the actual pluck. And I think that kind of makes the transition a lot cleaner. I'll show you the full transition in a minute when we get to the vocals. Now, as for the actual layer, the 3 remaining layers, well, there's one more, but again, I mentioned this is just a wave. It's made up of 3 layers. I'll play a part of it for you real quick, but there's really not much to it that I can show you because it's a wave. This is what it sounds like though, in the draw. Oh, right here. So as you can hear, there's a bit of a plucky layer to it, and then there's one plucky layer, and then there are 2 sort of saw high-end layers to it to make it a bit more massive. In terms of the mixing for it, there's a bit of resonance in here, so I took it down, and then just the usual high pass, and then a boost on the highs to kind of give that high end a little more spotlight. And then I don't think I ended up using this. This used to be an automated center boost for the highs, but I didn't end up using it though. And then I use this to kind of move the sounds to the sides because I have 1, 2, 3 layers playing sort of in the center. And I felt like the sides needed a bit more presence for the leads. So I actually split this using the stereo enhancer that just comes with FL Studio. And it's sent to the lead bus, and the lead bus is sent to the lead reverb, and I'll go over those in a minute. Now, as for the last layer, it's an octave lead, and it comes in later on in the drop right here. This is what it sounds like. So you don't really hear this too much in the mix, but after 16 bars of the drop, you kind of really have to, add something to keep things interesting. And I think I kind of thankfully managed to add this in a way where it's present, but you don't really hear it as a separate instrument. You just feel like something new came in on top of the leads, but nothing big changed. I think that's a silent, probably. Yeah. I can't. This could possibly be from Temple 1's silent pack. I think so. I can't remember which volume it was, but in terms of the effects, I took them all off. I just left the EQ because I think the EQ kind of gave a little bit of a nice high-end boost. It is quite a big high-end boost, so I didn't really end up boosting any high-end off here. I just took down some of the mids and some of the resonant frequencies. And then it has some slight auto panning on it, similar to the main pluck in the breakdown. So again, over a 4-bar period, it gets panned 25% left and then right. So very subtle and over a very long time. So you don't really hear that effect or it kind of helps give more room to the leads in terms of side presence. And then in terms of the lead bus here, we have Cytomic the glue. And what I did with that is I kind of wanted to glue all the layers together because there's about 6 layers going into this. And obviously all of them have all sorts of different character to them. So I had to glue them just a little bit. And at the same time gives them a bit more sustain, which I think was needed because the notes were a little too sharp or short, so to speak. So to kind of make them more spaced out or slightly longer in character and fade out a little more smoothly, I added a bit more sustain. And then I actually didn't end up using this. This used to be a mag EQ with a high-end boost on it. But after mastering, I kind of went back and I thought the lead sounded like they had too much high end, so I took this off. And then this is just a low pass filter for filtering. And then this is the delay I talked about. So this applies to all the leads at the same time. So have a bit of a high cut at 10K, and then low cut is at 348. And then it's full ping pong, obviously for the leads. And then there's a sidechain for all the leads, same amount of sidechain. It's 50%. And I think that worked best. In terms of the reverb, I just have simple standard reverb, nothing under 240K, but again, it kind of rolls off. And then mostly kind of takes care of the EQ, is taken care of by the EQ at 200 Hertz. And then all sorts of resonating. Now, this might seem a bit extreme. Obviously, you've seen other examples on some of my other sounds, but you have to remember that this is 6 different layers kind of going into one reverb. And so things can add up pretty fast on this. So I had to take some of these frequencies down. And you see some of them are taken down more than others and less than others. And it really depends on how strong each resonating note comes through. And so these values are kind of just based on how I felt the balance should be, and I think it ended up sounding pretty good. And then there's the lead reverb on the lead. It's at about 35%. And that's it for the leads. So with that, we can end the melodic section or the synth section, and now we can go start going into effects and vocals and all that stuff. And I think this is probably going to be the last section I do, because I think a lot of these standard crashes and effects don't really need to be covered because there's really not much going on. I mean, in terms of the actual sweeps and impacts and all that stuff, it's just really standard effects that I don't really have that much processing on. So for example, this crash here, it's just a standard crash from a pack, and I just have a sidechain on it, and then an EQ with a high pass and a high boost, and then some delay. And this is pretty much the same for all my effects, the impact effects, I guess, or transition effects. So I'll mostly be covering sort of the atmosphere effects and the vocal effects, and then I'll probably end up covering some of the little details here and there that I did in the track in terms of maybe some automation, uncommon automation, just to make sure that I cover that. So I guess a good place to start would be the bridge. So over here, there's quite a bit of stuff that goes on. Now, well, I can just play 2 from the original then. So as you can hear, I mean, just to kind of unsolo everything one by one, or unmute everything one by one, I think the most important element here is some LFO controlled vocals. So I'll show you the vocal section first, and then kind of show you how that fits in with everything else. So here are the vocals in this section. I'll bring this one in a little bit, but I think these 2 are the main 2 vocals to watch out for. So as you can hear, there's some panning action going on with the vocals, and the panning actually changes. So if I solo this, you'll hear, I'll show you the LFO tool, what's happening with it in a second. But what's basically happening is every bar, the speed at which the vocals auto pan changes. So here kind of goes at a certain speed, and then here goes down, and it keeps going down every bar until the panning basically stops. And then we go into the breakdown. So here's what this looks like in real time with actual LFO tool in action. All right, so here is the LFO tool, and what I want you to pay attention to is this section here. So as you can see, the length of the auto panning, 35%. The length kind of changes, it becomes longer. I'll play you the second vocal clip here. It's just a spoken phrase that's just the word somewhere. Now, I think this was from Mandy Jones' vocal pack. It was at a different BPM, and obviously the pitch, I think, was a little bit different. So I went in and adjusted them on my own using some tools in FL Studio like New Tone, which are used for manipulating vocals. In terms of this vocal right here, I have EQ on it. These are some resonating notes and a high pass. And then this gives the vocal a bit more mids or a bit more body thickness. And then this is the auto panning I talked about. And then this is just some delay. I don't have ping pong on, and the reason for that is the vocals are already being panned left and right. So it would sound a little too messy, I think, if I had the vocals being panned and the delay being left and right as well. It was sort of like the vocals would be interfering with the delay, and I didn't want that, so I just left the delay on just normal mode, just centered, and then this goes to my vocal reverb right here, which has an EQ on it for some resonance as well, and a sidechain. And then the second vocal, which is the spoken phrase I just mentioned, I have a boost on the highs, just to kind of give it more presence and strength, and then just a high pass and a resonance thing here. And I think this is a high boost right here. So this is where it kind of comes in, right before the leads, and I thought it needed a bit of a volume boost in that section because obviously different instruments playing at different volumes and all that, so you have to sort of play around with volumes throughout the track, and you have to end up automating sometimes. So that's for that somewhere. It has its own reverb actually, and also some resonance as well. I kind of copied this from the main vocal reverb. I didn't end up changing it because I thought it sounded fine just like that. And then here's an interesting, I think this is a vocal loop from, the Siren Vocal Pack by Black Octopus Sound, I think. And this loop, I think, kind of added a bit more movement to this bridge section. This is what it sounds like. So it has an interesting character to it. It doesn't sound like that from the pack, but it's just about what I did with it. So I took down the highs because I don't think it needed more highs than that because of how I wanted to use it in the mix. And I probably don't need these two. I should probably delete this. But yeah, there's this, and then just a resonant section here. And then I have a high-end boost with saturation, and then vocoding. So the vocoding, I think, is what really changes it the most. This LFO tool, by the way, is just auto panning as well. Kind of goes with the auto panning of this LFO modulated vocal here. Now, back to the vocoder, I don't really know my way around this plugin, to be honest. The way I did this was I tried some presets, and when I found one which I thought was a bit of a was a good starting point, I just kind of tweaked it. So tweaked this, and then I tweaked, I think, the pitch as well. I can't remember where that was, but it's somewhere over here. And then I tweaked possibly the note as well. And then I kind of ended up with this interesting sound. So without that, it sounds like this. So it kind of gives it a bit of an acid, like it sounds like a bit of an acid. And I think it kind of adds that nice character to this section here. So kind of to make something more interesting, I guess I wanted to try something new. So I added it here. It also continues playing in the breakdown, which is where the main vocal ad-libs come in. There's an added vocal loop that comes in the breakdown over here. And this is what they sound like together. So as you can see, first of all, they have some reverb and delay on them. Well, maybe not delay, but sounds like reverb. And if you'll notice, I actually have these vocal loops or patterns, especially the second one that comes in the breakdown. I have it playing in the gaps between the main vocal ad-libs. And I think that kind of, it keeps the breakdown busy. So these are pretty much sent to the same channel as I mentioned with the vocoder on it. So in terms of the main ad-libs, let's go through them one by one. Here's what they sound like. So very nice atmospheric vocals here. These are all from Victoria's Vocal Essentials pack. Now in terms of these vocals here, they're, believe it or not, they're actually all the same clip. But I modified each one of them individually, again using that new tone plugin I mentioned earlier, which comes with FL Studio. As you'll notice, CD A sharp, and then CD A sharp, CD A sharp, CD A sharp. They're all the same clip. They're just different renders after my edits on them. So I'm able, using that plugin I mentioned, I'm able to edit the length of each individual note in the ad-lib. And I'm able to edit the notes themselves. I can go up or down, which is why I have pretty much, liberty to kind of experiment with different notes in the vocal and kind of see what works best. So they're actually the same clip. The only different ones is the last three here. I think these ones. So these ones, I can't remember what pack these are from, but yeah, I kind of had to go in and edit those as well for length and pitch. And I ended up with a really nice kind of vocal line that complements the chords being played with the pads, by the pads in the breakdown. So for those, for the most part, it's very similar processing. So I have 2, 3, and 4 sent to one channel, and then 6, 7, 8 sent to the other. Now for these ones, I kind of have the highs taken down because the breakdown is generally supposed to be a more laid back or chilled section, and so having some hiss or rasp from the vocals in that section was a little too much for the breakdown, so I took it out. And then there's just a high pass here for the mids or the lows. And then now here's an interesting thing. All these are actually automated. Now the only stable thing is the EQ and the delay. So the delay is Again, just a standard delay. The high cuts and low cuts are a bit different than some of the other sounds, but generally the same settings. Now for this section, this is the only thing that plays. It's the EQ, or that's enabled, the EQ and the delay. So 6, 7, and 8 are a bit different. I think 5 is actually the same. Yeah, 5 is the same. 6 is a bit different. It goes into the next channel here. And basically that has a compressor on it, because obviously the style of each clip in these ad-libs is a little different. So I tried to bring them down in terms of dynamic range a bit closer together. I wanted them all to play at the same volume, sort of. And then there's an EQ on them with just a high pass at 200. And then Saturn for a bit of saturation, and then some delay. So nothing fancy. And then they go into the same vocal reverb as I mentioned before. Now, just a couple of automation things here. I just kind of wanted to fade this one in because I felt the attack was a little strong, and obviously vocals, you know, these are sample pack vocals, but at the same time, you want them to sound as natural as possible, and kind of having a letter just kind of have a sharp attack to it isn't really the best, especially if the ad-lib clip is only starting. So I automated the first sort of syllable or letter to kind of come in gradually. And then for this one, it was the same idea. The only difference is I felt here I used one of FL Studio's tools, which is declicking. That sadly did not work with this clip, so I had to do it manually. But this is usually my go-to method. If something has a little bit of a click in the start or end, as you can see here, you can kind of make it fade in or out by using these declicking algorithms here. And they came in pretty handy, to be honest. So that's for those clips. I think that would probably be it for the vocals. Oh, there's a couple of others, actually. So there's this one here. And that one, I think, is from Temple 1's vocal pack. It only has a high pass on it, and then some delay and sidechain. And then I think there is another one right here, and it sounds like this. So it's really just a short transition vocal right before the right comes in, which sounds, and that section sounds like this. And then we have that long vocal I was going to mention. It's right here. It sounds like this. So this one is actually from Victoria's pack. It's reversed and pitched, as you can see here. And I kind of had to edit it a little bit as well to make it longer to fit the transition. I used it in the transition to the build-up and the transition to the piano section. I'll quickly show you what those sound like right here. So pretty nice. Really fits the transitions, especially in terms of length. So yeah, worked out great. In terms of that one, I have quite a bit of processing, especially the compression. Kind of took me a while, so I had to make it fit the track, and lots of EQing, high pass, and then because the way I pitched it, it was a little extreme, but I had to kind of overcome a little bit of the resonance with some drastic EQ here, and then I had to boost the highs to make the vocal come through a little bit more, and same thing here for a little bit more rasp, and especially since it plays in the drop, you kind of have to make it pop through a little bit harder. Saturation for the same reason. Kind of give it more body and high end, and then delay, nothing different here as usual, and then another saturator for even more high end. And then CLA 2A, which is something I've used before to compress vocals. There's a little bit of compression going on here. I just turned off the analog because I don't like the analog noise to come out of this. And then I think, there's one small little detail when the vocals come in this section here. So right before the leads come in, I'll show you what that sounds like in the actual MP3 file first. I'll show you there's sort of like a small or a subtle layer playing under the main vocal section here. So if you haven't heard that, if you didn't catch that, there's basically two vocal clips playing right here, these two. The first main one, which is just the spoken word somewhere, which I've already covered, quickly once again sounds like this. But at the same time, there's actually another subtle vocal that kind of comes under that and complements the higher frequencies. It sounds like this. The kind of vision I had for that would be, or was, I wanted this to play sort of in the center, and then I wanted this vocal clip to kind of play quickly between the sides, just to give a little bit of a more interesting sound. So together they sound like this. So as you can hear, it kind of bounces off the sides really quickly here. And in terms of the processing on that, I have an EQ, standard, and then give it a little bit more mid-range body. And then I actually had this off, but I had this on, but I decided not to use it. And this is the auto pan, which, so as you can see, the rate's pretty fast. It's just an eighth of a bar. So, and the panning is 100%, so it bounces between the sides really quickly. And that's the kind of result that I wanted to get with it. And so that kind of covers it for the vocals here. After that, we just get into a whole bunch of effects, which I don't really think need covering. A lot of it is just like auto panning and EQ, delay and EQ, auto panning and EQ. It's just a lot of the same stuff over and over. Kind of all speaks for itself in terms of the effects. However, I think one thing worth mentioning, there is one thing I actually forgot. So with the drums, there are a couple of vocal loops clips playing here, and this is what they sound like. So again, these are just the vocoded samples or loops that I showed you before. They're just chopped a little differently and play something a bit of a different pattern that kind of goes along with the groove and the bass line and this section of the track here, the intro. So together, I mean, everything sounds like this. So that brings me to these little tonal effects here, which I haven't covered yet, actually. And so I have quite a bit of tonal effects here going on. I'll cover them one by one very quickly because they're not that important, and they just usually, for the most part, they just play once in the track. So I have this one here, which is a sort of like an atmospheric acid, maybe, or like a, I don't know what to call it, but it sounds like this, and it plays over here. So it's sort of like an atmosphere, and this is actually from Spire. Not really sure what, can't remember what, I think it's one of the default banks possibly. Can't remember which bank it was from. But has some auto pan on it, obviously, as you can see. And then some EQ and just some sidechain. In terms of reverb, it is routed to a reverb send that I use for most of my effects, like crashes and sweeps and impacts and all that. I usually just use one reverb for those, and it's sidechained. It has just some EQ on it to boost the high end. So I actually just sent it over to that, and it worked. And then I have another tonal sound here. And that one has quite a bit of delay on it. It has these plugins on it. High pass, low pass, and then some delay. So again, nothing fancy in terms of settings. These are pretty much the same. The only difference is this one has a sidechain and this one doesn't have a sidechain or an EQ. So different, I guess I use the different ones for the different parts of the track. And then what else do I have? I have this one right here. So it's sort of like a high octave acid, and it sounds like, in the track, it actually sounds like this. And that one has some EQ, delay, and then some saturation, and obviously sidechain as well. And so I have, these are some of my go-to sends. I'll show you what I've used this for in a minute, because I don't usually use reverb on my claps. This is just for a little automation section. But I've sent this to my claps because I think this reverb worked pretty well with the sound. And then I have this one over here. So these are like just random atmospheric sounds, I guess. Let me see if there are any others kind of worth mentioning. Maybe this one. Yeah, I think this one is pretty, it's pretty present in the track. This is what it sounds like with everything over here. So as you can hear, it's covered in delay and reverb, and so I actually don't have a high pass on it because when I played it, as you can hear, it doesn't really have much going on under 200 anyway, so it's kind of pointless to have a high pass on it if there's nothing to high pass. I just have a low pass on it actually because I didn't want the highs above 2K, and obviously it has some delay on it, and it's sent to the same reverb as well that I sent this little acidish thing to. And then that's about it for the important tonal sounds. And then they just repeat. There's just one with some crazy panning automation over here in the outro. So that one's just like a little, I don't know, like an atmosphere thing that plays in the outro. Along with the kick. Kick has some delay on it as well. And then obviously these two have some interesting stereo automation going on right here. So I brought back the kick delay in the outro. And then that kind of covers it for the effects really. I think if I go to some of the interesting automations I've done, I think one of them would probably be for the vocals in here, when the vocal ad-libs. So this little section here that I'll play for you right now. So as you can hear, the vocals play alongside with the leads as well. Now, the thing is, when I played these ad-libs here earlier in the breakdown, obviously they were a little subtle, meant to kind of match the vibe of the entire breakdown. But then when the leads come in, it's an entirely different section of the track where things are kind of playing at full volume, full cutoff. All the lead layers are kind of playing, well, most of the lead layers are playing. And then there's also, pads as well that are playing. So the initial processing that I had for these vocal ad-libs here wasn't really working for this section of the track. So I had to automate some stuff to kind of give them a little bit more energy in the section. And this is where these plugins come in, right here. These three, well, this one not anymore, but this doesn't come in here, but these do. So I automated a compressor and I automated a saturator to kick in. So if I go a little early, these are not on, and then when I kick into the leads, these turn on. So here's what these do to the vocals. So I'm going to play them with and without each one, and then obviously you'll probably hear a big difference here. So as you can hear, there's quite a bit of a difference here. First of all, the volume's gone up. So that's probably the biggest difference, is they become louder, and you definitely need that because there's a whole lot more playing in this section than in this section, or earlier on in the breakdown. And then the compressor really kind of helps bring or kind of shape the vocals in a way where the fade outs are still present, and obviously, you kind of want the tail of the vocals to still be present, especially with the reverb, and I think the compressor really helped with that. The rest is just standard automation, really. I think that kind of really covers it. So I hope you enjoyed watching, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. If you want me to cover something specific or go into more detail with something else in the track that I didn't really go in detail with, let me know, and I'll, if I'm able to, I'll make a video about it. Otherwise, thanks a lot for watching. Please comment, subscribe, and like all that stuff, and I will see you guys in the next video.